The roll-top door screamed like metal on bone, a shriek that echoed in the cavernous hallway of Stop and Store. Eli shoved it higher, his thin shoulders aching from the cold and the effort. The November wind whipped at his back, funneling ice and grit into the darkness. The auctioneer's laugh was still ringing in his ears, a hearty, cruel sound that had carried across the lot. Unit 14B! Unpaid, unknown, unseen. Do I hear $1? Sold! To the gentleman by the fence. Then the wink, the chuckle, the jingle of keys tossed at his feet. Have fun with the cleanup, old-timer. It's all yours. A joke. They'd given the homeless man a storage unit as a joke? The door slammed up into its housing, and the smell hit him. A thick, damp fist of mildew, mouse droppings, and the acidic decay of forgotten things. He clicked on the weak, flickering flashlight he'd salvaged from a dumpster, its beam cutting a pathetic circle in the gloom. The joke was a good one. The unit was 10 by 20 feet of pure garbage. A mountain of black trash bags, split open and spilling styrofoam peanuts and rotting fabric. A single three-legged chair, 3 bald tires, a rust-stained porcelain sink sitting inexplicably in the center. It was a tomb, but it was a tomb out of the wind. That was all he'd cared about. He stepped inside, his broken boots crunching on something brittle. He just needed a corner, a place to unroll his sleeping bag and escape the coming freeze. He began to clear a space, pushing aside the reeking bags, his breath pluming in the tiny flashlight beam. He worked for nearly an hour, his hands numb, his stomach a cold, empty knot. He shoved at a large, warped piece of particle board, and it toppled over with a wet thud, revealing what was behind it. Not the concrete wall. A footlocker. Small, metal, the color of a faded robin's egg. It was tucked into the back corner, hidden beneath a stained canvas tarp. It was locked, but not with a heavy-duty disc lock. It was a tiny, cheap brass padlock, the kind a child might use on a diary. He looked around, found a rusted piece of rebar in the corner, and wedged it into the shackle. He put his meager weight into it. The metal shrieked and snapped. For a moment, he just stared at it, the silence of the unit pressing in. This felt different. This wasn't a joke. This was a secret. He knelt, the concrete biting into his knees, and lifted the lid. The smell wasn't mildew. It was lavender, faint, dry, and clean. The flashlight beam found the contents. First, a small, hand-knitted baby blanket, folded perfectly. It was pale yellow. Tucked beside it, a single, impossibly small white shoe with a scuffed toe. And beneath that, a small silver rattle, tarnished with age. His hand, chapped and gray with dirt, trembled as he reached for the last item. A thick stack of letters, bound with a faded red ribbon. He pulled them out. They were heavy. The envelopes were creamy, expensive paper. The top one was addressed in elegant, fading cursive, "To my dearest Thomas." But there was no address, no stamp. They had never been sent. His fingers, clumsy with cold, fumbled with the ribbon. It crumbled in his grasp. The first letter slid free. He shouldn't. This was private. This was a violation. He was a man living in a box of garbage. What did he know of privacy? He unfolded the page. The date at the top read May 14th, 2003. Wait, before you see what's inside, if this story already has your heart pounding, tell us where you're watching from. When forgotten boxes open, when second chances hide under dust and debt, subscribe and stay close. You'll never guess what's been left behind. Now, back to the lock clicking open. My dearest Thomas. It's happened. It's really, truly happened. I'm writing this from the hospital, and I can't stop crying. But they're the good kind of tears. She's here. Our daughter. She arrived this morning at 6:04 a.m., just as the sun was coming up. She's so small, Thomas. So perfect. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She has your eyes. I know that sounds crazy. How can I tell already? But they're your eyes. That same deep, serious blue. And she has a full head of blonde hair, fine as corn silk. I've named her Lily. I hope you like it. Lily Sullivan. It sounds like a song. Oh God, Thomas, I wish you were here. I wish you could see this. The nurses are so kind, but their kindness just makes me miss you more. They keep telling me what a brave army wife I am. I don't feel brave. I feel split in two. Half of me is here with this miracle, and the other half is wherever you are. They told me MIA doesn't mean gone. They said you're strong, that you'll be found. I am holding on to that. I am holding on to it with everything I have. I'm scared. I'm so scared to do this alone. But then I look at her, sleeping in my arms, and I know I'm not alone. She's a part of you. You are here. I will keep this for you. I will write to you every day, every week. I will tell you everything about her. So when you come home, not if, when, you won't have missed a single moment. I'll put them in this box, our box. I love you. I love you more than all the stars. Come home to us. Yours forever, Alara. Eli sat back on his haunches, the letter shaking in his hand. The flashlight beam wavered. He was trespassing on the most sacred ground. A birth, a war, a man lost, and a baby found. He looked around the filthy, lightless hole they'd given him. He felt like a ghoul, a rat disturbing a shrine. His first instinct was to close the box, push it back, and leave. Find another unit, sleep in the snow. He couldn't. His fingers, acting of their own accord, reached for the next letter, and the next. He spent the night in Unit 14B, not as a shelter, but as a vigil. He sat cross-legged on the frozen concrete, wrapped in his threadbare sleeping bag, reading a life by the dying beam of a cheap flashlight. The letters painted a world. Ilara, it seemed, had moved in with her father, Robert Davies, after the money got tight. The unit must have been his. She wrote about Lily's first laugh, a sound like little bells. She wrote about the terror of a 3 a.m. fever, walking the floors of a small apartment, begging a tiny, fussy baby to please, please be okay. She wrote about her anger at the army, at the world, at the silence from his commanders. MIA, she wrote in a letter from 2004, is the cruelest word in the language. It is a room with no doors. Eli read on, the hours and the flashlight battery dying together. He knew these emotions. He didn't know war, but he knew the 3 a.m. terror. He knew the desperate pleading. His own ghosts stirred in the cold, dark unit. He saw a rainy windshield, the crunch of metal. He heard his wife's name, Sarah, tear from his own throat. He felt the phantom weight of a small 5-year-old hand in his. Leo. He shook his head, a violent, painful motion. Not now. He couldn't. He had to stay here, with Lily. He was deep in the stack, somewhere in 2005, when the tone of the letters changed. The playful anecdotes about a stubborn toddler who refused to eat peas vanished. The writing became frantic, the elegant cursive tightening into a desperate scrawl. Thomas, my love, something is wrong. She's not herself. She's so tired. And the bruises. The doctor said she's just an active toddler, but they're on her back, her legs. She hasn't been climbing. He's running tests. He used the word oncologist. I'm sitting in the waiting room. I've never been so cold. Please come home. Please, Please, Thomas, I need you. Lily needs you." Eli's chest tightened. He knew, with the sickening finality of a man who had seen the end of his own world, what was coming. He read faster, turning the pages, his breath catching in his throat. The letters became a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy, platelets, and terrifying, incomprehensible medical terms. Ilara's hope, so fierce in the first letters, began to fray. She wrote of the smell of antiseptic, of the beeping machines that haunted her sleep, of Lily's beautiful blonde hair falling out in clumps. He found himself weeping, silent, hot tears freezing on his chapped cheeks. He wasn't crying for Ilara or Lily, not really. He was crying for himself, for the grief he'd buried so deep it had turned to permafrost. He'd lost his job after the accident, then the apartment, then his mind. He hadn't just lost his family, he had actively, methodically dismantled his own life, believing he deserved nothing else. He had walked away from his brother's spare room, from the therapists, from the pitying looks, and into the anonymous cold of the street. He'd sought numbness, and now, in a garbage-filled box, a ghost had found him and was demanding he feel. He reached the last letter. It was dated October 21st, 2006. The paper was stiff, as if it had been tear-soaked and dried over and over. "My dearest Thomas, she's gone. Our baby is gone. She died this morning, in my arms. The sunrise was red. She hated the mornings at the hospital, but this one was quiet. The machines were off. It was just us. She wasn't in pain anymore. She just slipped away. She was 3 years, 10 months, and 7 days old. She loved yellow. She loved dogs. She hated naps. She had your eyes, Thomas. Right to the end, she had your beautiful, serious eyes. I don't know what to do now. The world is gray. It has no sound. I am burying this box with her. Not with her, but in this storage unit. My father's unit. I can't have these things in the apartment. I can't look at her blanket. I can't see her little shoe. It's too much. It's all too much. I am packing away her life and mine with it. I don't know if you're alive. They've stopped sending notices. It's just silence. Maybe you're gone too. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe you're with her, somewhere better than this. I loved you, Thomas. I loved her so much it broke me. Goodbye. Ilara." Eli closed the letter. The flashlight was dead. The unit was plunged into absolute darkness, a blackness so profound it felt solid. The only sound was the distant howl of the wind outside and the ragged, broken sound of his own breathing. The joke unit. The box of garbage. It was a grave, a memorial. He sat in the dark for over an hour, the cold seeping into his bones, but he didn't feel it. He felt a terrible, crushing weight. This wasn't his. This story didn't belong to him. He was just a vagrant who had broken a lock. But in the dark, a new, terrifying, and unfamiliar feeling began to glow in his chest. It wasn't just grief. It was purpose. This wasn't the end of the story. Ilara had buried it, but it was his story. Thomas. He was MIA, presumed dead. But Ilara didn't know. She presumed. What if she was wrong? The thought was a jolt, more powerful than the cold. What if Thomas came home? What if he came home broken and battered from a war, only to find nothing? An empty apartment, a family-in-law who told him Ilara had moved on, a man who never ever knew he had a daughter, who never knew she had lived and fought and died. The injustice of it, the sheer catastrophic waste of it, made Eli sick. He couldn't. He was nobody, a ghost himself. He had no phone, no money, no car. He was a man who ate from trash cans. What was he supposed to do? He felt the stiff edge of the envelopes in his lap. He had one clue. Ilara had mentioned living with her father, my father's unit. And on one of the early envelopes, in the From section, she had idly scribbled an address, probably for a bill she was paying. Ilara Davies, 412B, Sycamore Heights, Apt 3C. Sycamore Heights. He knew it. It was on the other side of the city. A cluster of run-down brick apartment buildings, maybe 15, 20 miles from here. It was impossible. A 20-mile walk in a polar vortex for a man who hadn't eaten in a day, all to chase a ghost from 2003? He fumbled in the dark, his numb fingers finding the letters, the tiny shoe, the yellow blanket. He carefully, reverently placed them back in the footlocker. He closed the lid. He couldn't lock it. He stood up, his joints screaming in protest. He felt his way to the front of the unit, grabbed the metal pull rope, and yanked the door down. It slammed shut with the finality of a cell door. He stood in the freezing, pre-dawn gray of the storage facility hallway. He could go back to the overpass. He could try the shelter, wait in line for 3 hours for a bowl of thin soup. Or he could walk. He turned left, toward the exit gate. His legs felt heavy, dead, but they moved. He pushed through the rusted turnstile and out onto the street. The wind hit him, a physical blow. He pulled his thin coat tighter, tucked his chin, and started walking towards Sycamore. The walk was a pilgrimage through his own personal hell. He walked for 7 hours. The city woke up around him. Commuters stared at him from their warm cars with pity or disgust. He passed donut shops, the smell of coffee and hot sugar making him dizzy. He passed mothers walking children to school, their bright, laughing faces a painful echo of the ghosts in his head, both Lily's and Leo's. Every step was a battle. His hunger was a living thing, clawing at his stomach. The cold was a predator, sinking its teeth into his ankles, his wrists, his ears. He wanted to give up. He wanted to lie down in the dirty snow on the side of the road and just stop. What was he doing? He was a lunatic, a homeless man on a phantom quest. But every time he stopped, every time he leaned against a frozen bus stop shelter, he felt the presence of the letters. He saw the image of the tiny white shoe. He heard the name, Lily. And he heard his own son's laugh, a memory so faded he was terrified it would disappear completely if he stopped moving. He arrived at Sycamore Heights just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the polluted sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. The building was even more run down than he'd imagined. Brick was missing, windows were cracked, a true dead end. He went to Apt 3C. The name on the buzzer was Kowalski. He slumped against the wall. Of course. It was 20 years ago. They were long gone. He was too late. The joke was on him, after all. He was just a fool, frozen and starving, standing at the wrong door. "You looking for someone?" The voice was rough, accented. He looked up. A woman in a thick bathrobe and slippers was standing in the doorway of 3A, smoking a cigarette. She was old, with a face like a weathered map of Eastern Europe. I'm sorry to bother you," Eli stammered, his lips so cold he could barely form the words. "I was looking for a family, the Davies, Ilara or Robert." The woman's eyes, sharp and suspicious, narrowed. "Davies? My God, nobody by that name here. Not for 15 years at least. Robert? Yes, he was in 3C. He passed away, long time now." And his daughter? Eli pushed, his voice desperate. Ilara? The woman took a long drag of her cigarette, the cherry glowing in the dusk. The sad one. Yes. Skinny girl, blonde hair. Always looked like she was carrying the world. Had a little one. Sickly, I think. She moved. After her father died, she just left. Packed 2 bags and was gone. Sold everything else. Where? Eli whispered. Did she say where she was going? Who are you? A bill collector? No, Eli said. He fumbled with the zipper of his coat, his fingers useless. I'm a friend. I found something of hers. The woman, Mrs. Petrov, looked at him, her gaze traveling from his matted hair to his broken boots. She saw the desperation, but she also saw something else. Something that wasn't dangerous. She used to talk about a sister, Mrs. Petrov said, her voice softening just a fraction. Out west. Oregon, I think. Portland. Said she was going to see the ocean. Never heard from her again. Oregon. The word was a death sentence. It might as well have been the moon. Eli's shoulders sagged, the last bit of fight draining out of him. He'd come all this way for nothing. A total, complete dead end. Thank you, he mumbled, turning to leave. Hey, she called out. He stopped. You look bad. You hungry? Eli looked at her. Her face was lined and hard, but her eyes were not unkind. He hadn't had a real human conversation he couldn't remember. Yes, he said, the word cracking. I am. She sighed, a plume of smoke. Come in. I made soup. You're not tracking mud on my floor. For an hour, Eli sat in a warm, over-cluttered kitchen that smelled of garlic and old wallpaper. He ate 3 bowls of a thick, hot borscht that burned his mouth and brought tears to his eyes. He told Mrs. Petrov the whole story. The storage unit, the joke, the letters, the child. She listened, her expression unchanging, smoking another cigarette. When he was done, she just nodded. Yes, that was her, the sad girl. She deserved better. They all do. She got up, went to a drawer, and came back. She pressed a crumpled $5 bill into his hand. It's all I have, she said, gruffly. I can't, Eli said, pulling his hand back. Don't be a stupid. You're a dead man walking. Take it. Go to the library. Get warm. Don't give up. The world is full of garbage, but sometimes not everything is, you know? Eli looked at the money. It was more than he'd held in months. It was a lifeline. He closed his hand around it. Thank you. God, thank you, Mrs. Petrov. God has nothing to do with it. Go, before my shows come on. He left the warmth of her apartment and stepped back into the freezing night. But he wasn't as cold. The soup was a fire in his belly, and the $5 bill was a stone in his pocket. He had one last chance. Oregon was impossible. But the letters, they weren't to Ilara. They were to Thomas. Thomas Sullivan, the MIA soldier. He walked another 3 miles to the downtown public library. The guard at the door looked him over, but Eli walked with a purpose he hadn't had before. He looked like a man with a mission, not a man looking for a warm place to nod off. He was allowed in. He went to the public computer terminals. He had 2 hours until they closed. He typed Ilara Davies and Oregon into Google. Nothing. Too common, too old. He sat back. Think, Eli. Think. The letters were to Thomas Sullivan. Ilara presumed he was dead, but what if he wasn't? He typed Thomas Sullivan, U.S. Army, MIA, and the years 2002 to 2005. His heart hammered. Dozens of hits. He clicked on a few. News articles, forums for veterans. He found one on a small, unofficial registry for a platoon from the 101st Airborne. Sullivan, Thomas J. Status, repatriated. POW 2003-2006. Eli stopped breathing. Repatriated. He wasn't dead. He wasn't MIA. He was a prisoner of war. He had come home. He'd been released in 2006, just months after Ilara wrote the last letter and buried her daughter's memory. She thought he was dead. He came home and she and the child he never knew existed were gone. Eli felt the floor tilt. The magnitude of the tragedy was suffocating. This was worse than he could have ever imagined. He scrolled, his hand shaking on the mouse. He found a link, a small local news article from 2007 about a hometown hero returning. It included a grainy photo of a gaunt man with haunted eyes, and it mentioned where he was recuperating, his hometown, this city. He searched Thomas Sullivan City. A white pages listing, an address, 1945 Elm Street. It was 4 miles away. He didn't walk, he ran. He ran from the library, a frantic, shuffling gait that drew stares. He ran through the darkening, frozen streets, his lungs on fire, the soup and the hope and the terror churning in his gut. He was no longer cold. He was burning. He found the street, Elm, a row of small post-war bungalows, tidy, working class. He found 1945, a small white house with a neat, bare-branched tree in the front yard. A light was on in the living room. He stood on the sidewalk, panting, a mess of sweat and grime. This was it. He was about to shatter a man's life. Or what? What was he doing? He was a homeless man, a thief who had broken into a storage unit and read a dead child's letters. He almost turned around. This was not his to do. This was a private grief, and he was a ragged interloper. He thought of Leo. He thought of the words he never got to say, the apologies he never got to make, the I love yous that got stuck in his throat, lost in the fog of his own depression. He walked up the short path. He raised a shaking, filthy hand. He knocked on the door. He heard movement, a muffled 1 second, the sound of a lock turning. The door opened. A man stood there, older than the photo, his hair gray at the temples, the haunted look in his eyes replaced by a quiet, deep wariness. But it was him, Thomas Sullivan. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. He looked normal. He looked at Eli, his expression shifting from neutral curiosity to guarded confusion. "Can I help you?" Eli's throat was closed. He couldn't speak. All the words he'd rehearsed, all the explanations, they evaporated. He was just a bum on a porch, stinking of mildew and sweat. He unzipped his coat. He reached into his shirt, where he'd tucked the one thing he'd brought with him, wrapped in a plastic bag he'd salvaged. He pulled it out. The small, hand-knitted, pale yellow baby blanket. He held it out. Thomas's eyes flicked from Eli's face to the blanket. His gaze locked onto it. His face didn't change, but the color drained from it. He went white. "Where?" Thomas whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Where did you get that?" I found it," Eli choked out. "In a storage unit, Unit 14B, at the Stop and Store." Thomas's hand, a strong, calloused hand, came up and took the blanket. He touched it like it was a holy relic, his fingers tracing the knit pattern. "There's more," Eli said, his voice breaking. There are letters." Thomas looked up, and for the first time, Eli saw the soldier. He saw the POW. His eyes were not weary. They were wells of absolute, terrifying pain. "Come in," Thomas said. The house was clean, simple. A recliner, a small TV, a few framed photos on the mantel. Men in uniform. No wife, no children. The house of a man living alone. Eli stood awkwardly in the entryway, afraid to touch anything. "I'll get your floor dirty." "Sit," Thomas commanded, pointing to the kitchen table. Eli sat. Thomas disappeared for a moment and came back with two things, a bottle of whiskey and a glass. He poured 3 fingers and pushed it toward Eli. "Drink." Eli, whose last drink had been a half-empty beer found in a bin, took the glass and drank. The whiskey was liquid fire, scorching a path to his stomach. It steadied him. Thomas sat opposite him. "Tell me." And Eli told him. He told him about the joke, the cold, the footlocker, the lock of blonde hair, the tiny shoe. And he told him about the letters. He told him about Ilara. And then he told him Lily. He watched as a man who had survived a war, who had survived being a prisoner, was undone at his own kitchen table. Thomas didn't make a sound. He didn't weep, but his face crumpled, his body folding in on itself, as if under a physical, crushing weight. The news of a daughter's birth and a daughter's death, delivered 2 decades late by a homeless stranger. She thought I was dead," Thomas finally whispered, staring at the yellow blanket in his hands. I got home, and she was gone. Her father, Robert, he was already sick. He told me she'd moved on, that she couldn't handle the waiting. He said she'd met someone else, that she didn't want to see me." "He was protecting her," Eli said, his voice quiet. "He knew she was breaking. He didn't know you were alive." "All this time," Thomas said, his voice thick. "All this time, I thought she just abandoned me. I was so angry. For years, the anger was all I had. And she was alone. She went through all that alone." He looked at Eli, his eyes red-rimmed and raw. Why? You could have sold that box, the locket, the rattle. You could have." "I had a son," Eli said. The words came out rough and unused. "His name was Leo. He was 5. There was an accident. Rain. I wasn't paying enough attention. My wife, Sarah, she survived, but she laughed. I couldn't be the man who did that, so I left too." He looked at his own filthy hands on the clean table. "I haven't said his name out loud in 3 years." The 2 men sat in the kitchen, a soldier and a vagrant, surrounded by the ghosts of their children. The silence was thick with shared, unspeakable loss. "I have the box," Eli said, "at the unit. I'll go get it for you." "No," Thomas said, standing up. "We'll go, together." He went to a hall closet and pulled out a heavy winter coat, a wool hat, and gloves. He threw them at Eli. "Put these on, you're freezing." They drove in Thomas's pickup truck, the heater blasting. Eli felt the warmth soak into his skin, and it felt so good it was painful. They didn't speak. They got to the storage facility. It was late, the lot empty. Eli used the rebar to pry open the door he'd pulled shut. The smell of mildew hit them. Thomas stepped inside, his flashlight, a powerful LED beam, cutting through the trash. Eli pointed. "Back there!" Thomas navigated the garbage and knelt before the small blue footlocker. He opened it. He saw the tiny shoe. He saw the silver rattle. He saw the lock of blonde hair. He reached in and, with a choked sob, he pulled out the stack of letters. He sat on the frozen concrete, just as Eli had, and began to read. Eli stood by the door, a sentinel, guarding this man's private Gethsemane. An hour passed. The only sound was the rustle of paper and the quiet, contained sobs of a man meeting his daughter for the first time. Finally, Thomas stood up, the box in his arms. He walked out of the unit. He looked at Eli, his face a ruin of grief and, strangely, of peace. "Thank you," he said. You brought my daughter home." He looked at Eli, really looked at him. At the thinness of his face, the desperation in his eyes, the way he huddled in the borrowed coat. "Come on," Thomas said, turning toward the truck. "Where?" Eli asked. "Home. You're not staying here. You can take the spare room. Just for the night. Get warm, please. I don't think I can be alone tonight." Eli looked back at the unit, the mountain of trash, the three-legged chair, the joke. He pulled the door down, the metal screaming, one last time. He got in the truck. That night, Eli took a shower. The hot water on his skin was a shock. He watched years of grime, of self-hatred swirled down the drain. He used a razor and shaved, watching a new, older, and unfamiliar face emerge from the matted beard. The eyes were the same, haunted, but they were his. He put on a set of clean clothes Thomas had left for him, sweatpants and a t-shirt that smelled of laundry detergent. He walked out to the living room. Thomas was on the sofa, the yellow blanket in his lap, the letters on the cushion beside him. "There's soup on the stove," Thomas said, not looking up. Eli nodded. He went to the kitchen. He served himself a bowl. He sat at the table where, hours before, his life had changed. He didn't leave the next day, or the day after. It had been 6 weeks. Eli was still at 1945 Elm Street. He was in the spare room. He had a job, landscaping, that Thomas had found for him through a buddy at the VFW. It was hard, cold, outdoor work, but Eli loved it. He loved the ache in his muscles, the paycheck in his pocket, the feeling of soil on his hands. He and Thomas didn't talk much about that night. They lived like two old roommates, sharing coffee in the morning, watching the news in the evening. They were two broken men, leaning on each other, healing in the quiet. Thomas had found Elara. He'd made the call to Oregon. Eli had been in the room. He'd only heard Thomas's side. "Elara?" "Yes, it's me. I'm alive. I know. Elara, I have to ask you, did we?" He'd listened for a long time, his face pale. And then he'd said the words. "I have them, Elara. I have the letters. I know. Her name was Lily. He was flying to Portland next week. Today, Eli was walking. He had the day off. He was clean, shaved, wearing new work boots and a warm coat he'd bought himself. He was walking back to the Stop-and store. He walked in the main office. The same manager was at the desk, looking at a racing form. "Can I help you?" he said, not looking up. "I'm here for Unit 14B, Eli said. The manager looked up. His eyes widened. He didn't recognize him, not at first. Then, holy, hey, it's you, the guy from the fence. You look different, Eli said. He slid a key across the counter, the key to the flimsy padlock that had been on the footlocker. "I'm done with the unit. It's empty." The manager stared at the key, then back at Eli, his mind unable to connect the two. "The unit? It was a joke, man. Just a goof." "I know," Eli said. He smiled. It was the first time he'd smiled in years.
"It felt rusty. It was funny, but I'm finished with it." What was in it?" the manager asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Nothing, Eli said. Just old memories. Things that needed to be found. He turned and walked out of the office, leaving the manager staring at the key. Eli walked out of the Stop and Store gates. It was sunrise. The early morning light was hitting the endless rows of corrugated metal doors, turning the cheap steel and rust into panels of blazing, brilliant gold. He pulled his hat on, tucked his chin against the cold, and started walking. Not to an overpass, not to a shelter. He was walking to work.